And welcome back to 101 East, where we're talking about the row over the health repercussions from French nuclear testing in Polynesia. Still with me in the studio, Roland Oldham, who's the president of the association Mururoa et Tatu, a group of former test site workers. The researcher Nick McLennan, who's the co-author of After Mururoa, France in the South Pacific, and from Paris by Patrice de Beer, who's the former editor of the French newspaper Le Monde. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. Now, one of the issues involved here is whether there is a proven link between the testing in French Polynesia and the cancer rates that we see there. Nick, what is the latest state of understanding as to the impact of radiation on cancer rates?
For French Polynesia, there hasn't been enough studies done by independent researchers, but as your report mentioned, there's a very interesting statement by a researcher from the French Government Medical Research Institute, which states explicitly that there's a link between radiation exposure and the high rates of thyroid cancer in French Polynesia. French Polynesia has about 2 or 3 times greater rates of thyroid cancer than comparable populations in the Pacific, and much higher than France itself. So for the first time, as was mentioned, an official French government statement has drawn that link between nuclear testing and the thyroid cancer rates.
But this comes after 30 years of testing and a great deal of concern previous to this. In your experience of what's been going on, what arguments have the French government been putting forward to not have thus far carried out extensive testing on the impact of what they did?
Well, one problem was during the peak of nuclear testing in the 1970s and 80s, the official French government position was that there were no dangers. Traditionally, politicians visiting Tahiti used to have a dip in the lagoon at Mururoa to show that there were no concerns. Yet there are concerns. In a study done in 1998 by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which did a snapshot view of radiation on Mururoa, they found that there's over 5 kilos, an estimated 5 kilos of plutonium in the sediments of the lagoon at Mururoa Atoll. So there are serious environmental impacts as well as health impacts. One of the issues that's raised is, can we get the documents that are needed to prove this? In Australia, we had to have a royal commission to get the evidence about the British tests.
What Roland, is the state of the argument here? I mean, presumably you must have brought actions of some kind to try and persuade the French to release some of the documentation attached to all of this.
Well, we have tried a lot of things, but I don't understand why the French government still have this sort of attitude. I think France, as we say, is the only democracy not to allow independent study to be done openly.
But has there not been any legal avenue open to you to go to the French courts and say you need to release this information for public scrutiny?
There are legal avenues, but in the French legislation you have to use first all the avenue in France itself, and before you go in the international level. But the legislation in France is very difficult for anyone to how do you call it, to get this document to be released. And the matter of fact, the French government had decided at some stage that this document should stay for 30 years secret. And then lately, they have decided that these 30 years will make it longer to 60 years. So from there on, 60 years after a nuclear test, all of our victims will be dead by then.
And Patrice de Beer, I assume that the domestic political interest in this story in France is probably so low that there's no real pressure on the government to address the issue with any immediacy.
Of course, first of all, the local MPs from French Polynesia have always been, or almost always been, from the French ruling party, same party than the French ruling party in France, so there is no political pressure. Then there is no public opinion pressure. And even more, one has to bear in mind that in France, over 80% of electricity is produced by nuclear energy. And anything that could worry public opinion about potential dangers, potential nuclear dangers, is political dynamite.
I mean, apart from the medical consequences, Roland, do you think that France really needs to stand up and accept some sort of a moral position on this?
Well, I'm a bit upset if France does not accept moral condition because
I mean, how important, for instance, would be at least, if not an apology, then an acceptance that perhaps they need to take more of an interest?
Well, it wouldn't cost much to France to make apology to our people, and I think that will be release a lot of pressure on the battle that we've been battling for 40 years. I think the main thing we are waiting first from French government is this apology to our people, and then the rest will go naturally.
Patrice de Beer, any chance that that apology will come, do you think?
The only chance that that apology would come would be for the Tahitians to take their political responsibilities and elect a government and MPs that could put pressure on the French government. The only time something was done was when Oscar Temaru was in power, and that didn't last long. But as long as the Polynesians elect right-wing MPs who are siding with the Paris government and a local ruling government that is siding with the French government, there will never be a real political pressure on Paris.
It's an interesting point, isn't it, that even the local politicians can't agree on what's going on here?
Well, I think people have talked about the money that's flowing into the French territories in the Pacific. France has strategic interests in Oceania. There's 11 million square kilometres of exclusive economic zone, an enormous resource. In the other French territory of New Caledonia, there's major strategic interests in nickel, about a quarter of the world's nickel reserves. So France still has strategic interests in the South Pacific, and that very much impacts on its role in the region. They put about $1 billion a year into each of their French territories. It's a lot of money, but it maintains that strategic presence.
Roland, as far as the domestic political scene is concerned, then why is it that you can't seem to present at least a united front to France on this issue?
Well, as you can see, our people are divided because, as I said before, because of the money and the pressure. Our politicians are divided, and also that the French government, when Oscar got elected, the French, when I was talking about blackmailing, the French have clearly say that they're gonna close down the finance, all the investment that France have in Polynesia.
Well, for you, what is the most immediate, most important thing that needs to be done now to demonstrate, A, that there's some goodwill there, and B, that progress will be made?
I think the most important action that can be taken by the French government is for this law to come up, this proposition of law, where the victim should be recognized in automatically without having to go through 10 years of court cases.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed for being with us. An interesting situation.
Thank you.
Hopefully there will be some progress. My thanks to my guests, Roland Oldham, Nick McClellan, and Patrice de Beer in Paris. Until next time, from all of us here at 101 East, it's goodbye.